Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. End of part 1. Mark walked back to his small apartment, his mind still racing with Eleanor's proposal. He couldn't shake the thought of her cold, confident demeanor, her words echoing in his mind. Marry me, for business. It seemed like an offer too good to refuse, but how could he possibly go through with it? How could he marry a woman he barely knew, let alone for something so transactional? The more he thought about it, the more desperate the situation seemed. His debts were suffocating him, and Eleanor's offer felt like a lifeline, but at what cost? He spent the night tossing and turning, unable to make up his mind. It felt wrong, but it also felt like the only way out. The next morning, after a restless sleep, Mark stood in front of the mirror, looking at his reflection, wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Later that day, he returned to Brooks' Bistro. Eleanor was already seated at their usual table, a cup of tea in front of her, her eyes focused on a tablet screen. She looked up when he walked in, her expression unreadable, but there was a slight glimmer of anticipation in her eyes, as if she knew he'd be back. Mark took a deep breath and sat down across from her. He was about to make the biggest decision of his life. I've thought about it, Mark said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. I'll do it. I'll marry you. Eleanor didn't flinch, didn't smile. She simply nodded, as if this was all part of the plan. Good, she said, her voice calm. The terms are simple. There's no love involved. We'll live separate lives when it comes to personal matters. You will take care of the business side of things when necessary, and I will take care of the financials. You'll have everything you need, no strings attached. Mark hesitated for a moment, the weight of what he was agreeing to pressing down on him. He had no idea what kind of life he was about to step into. It was a far cry from the simple life he had imagined for himself. But what choice did he have? He needed the money, needed the security. This was the only way to get it. And you won't expect anything else from me? Mark asked, still unsure. Eleanor's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. No, she said, but you will have everything you've ever dreamed of. In return for your name, your presence. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small document, sliding it across the table. Just sign here. Once you do, everything will be arranged. I'll pay off your debts, set you up with a financial advisor. You'll never have to worry about money again. Mark stared at the document for a moment, the ink on the paper feeling like a weight in the air. It wasn't love, not even close, but the prospect of never having to worry about money again, of being able to pay off his father's debts and start fresh, was enough to push him forward. He signed the paper without another word. Done, he said, signing his name at the bottom. Eleanor stood, smoothing her dress as she reached across the table to shake his hand. Welcome to the family, Mark. You won't regret this. She gave him one last, calculating look before walking away, leaving him sitting at the table, feeling both relieved and unsettled. What had he just done? Was he truly ready for the life that awaited him? The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and meetings, things Mark wasn't used to. Eleanor had kept her word, paying off his debts and setting up a trust fund for him. But despite the financial relief, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He wasn't sure if it was the loneliness or the lack of genuine connection, but he felt strangely adrift. He hadn't expected love, not from this arrangement, but a part of him had hoped for something more, a real connection, a bond. Instead, he was just another piece in Eleanor's well-organized puzzle. But then, one evening, after a particularly long day at the office, he found himself walking past a local art gallery. He paused for a moment, his eyes catching the vibrant colors of the paintings displayed in the window. He was drawn to them, and without thinking, he walked inside. Inside the gallery, the quiet hum of classical music filled the air, and the walls were lined with breathtaking artwork. Mark felt a strange pull toward one of the paintings. It was a portrait, not of a person, but of a scene of a bustling city street, painted with such raw emotion that it almost felt alive. He was so captivated by it that he didn't notice the young woman standing beside him, admiring the same piece. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" the woman said, her voice soft and warm. Mark turned to face her, surprised to find a young woman, probably around his age, with deep brown eyes and an easy smile. She was dressed casually, not like the polished women he was used to seeing in his world. She looked out of place, but in the best possible way. "Yeah," he said, his voice more relaxed than it had been in days. It's amazing. The way the artist captures the feeling of the city. It almost feels like you're right there." She smiled, and Mark felt a strange warmth spreading through him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a connection, something real. Maybe it was just the art, or maybe it was her smile, but in that moment, he wasn't just a businessman or a man who had just sold his life for financial security. He was simply Mark, a man who could still feel something, who could still see beauty in the world. "I'm Emma," she said, offering him her hand. Mark shook her hand, feeling a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew it was something worth exploring. "Mark," he replied, his heart racing a little faster than it should have. "Nice to meet you." He didn't know it yet, but this simple encounter was about to change everything. End of part 2. Mark couldn't stop thinking about Emma. After their brief meeting at the gallery, he found himself drawn to her smile, her warmth, the way she made him feel like he wasn't just another businessman in a world full of calculations. It had been weeks since their first encounter, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something real between them, something more than the life he had been living. The next day, he found himself back at the gallery, not even sure why he was there. Was he hoping to see Emma again, or was he just looking for an escape from the world of business and contracts that he had locked himself into with Eleanor? As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of paint and old wood greeted him. The gallery was quiet, the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. He walked slowly past the paintings, taking in the artwork, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman he had met, Emma. He hadn't expected her to have such an impact on him. He hadn't expected to feel this way at all. Just as he was about to leave, he spotted her across the room, standing in front of a painting that caught her attention. Without thinking, Mark walked over, his heart racing as he approached her. "Hey, Emma," he said, his voice unsure. She turned to face him, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Mark," she said, smiling warmly. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Neither did I," he said, his voice low. "I guess I was just drawn to this place again. There's something about it, it feels like a different world." Emma nodded, her gaze drifting back to the painting she had been admiring. "Yeah, I know what you mean. There's something magical about art. It makes you feel like you can see the world in a different way." Mark felt a sudden urge to open up, to tell her the truth. But he held back, unsure if he was ready to share the weight of his life with her. He couldn't tell her about Eleanor, about the deal he had made, not yet. Not when he didn't even know what he felt about Emma. But the more time he spent with her, the more he realized that she was different. She wasn't like the women he had known in his high society world. She wasn't interested in his money or his connections. She just seemed to see him. And that terrified him. "Do you ever think about what your life could be, if you weren't bound by everything else?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma looked at him, her eyes searching his face for a moment before she answered. "All the time," she said softly. "But I guess that's the thing about life. We're always tied to something, whether we want to be or not. Our choices, our circumstances, they shape who we are. But sometimes, it's nice to dream, isn't it?" Mark swallowed, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never thought of it that way. All his life, he had been driven by the need to succeed, to climb the social ladder, to prove that he was worth something. But now, standing here with Emma, he felt like he had lost sight of what really mattered. What had he been chasing all this time? Yeah, he said quietly, it's nice to dream. They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the music filling the space between them. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he could breathe, like he wasn't just playing a part in some endless game of business deals and power struggles. I'm glad you came back, Emma said after a while. It's nice to talk to someone who doesn't expect anything from me. Mark smiled, a small, genuine smile that he hadn't shown in weeks. I'm glad I came back too. It was then that he realized he wanted more. He wanted to get to know her better. He wanted to see where this feeling could go, to see if there was a way to escape the life he had been trapped in with Eleanor. But how could he pursue that when he had already signed a contract with her? How could he tell Emma the truth about who he really was? As they said their goodbyes and Mark walked out of the gallery, his mind was racing. He had no answers, no plan. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't keep living this double life forever. Sooner or later, he would have to make a choice. He just didn't know if he was ready to make it. End of part 3. Mark couldn't stop thinking about Emma, the way her words echoed in his mind long after their encounter. He couldn't deny the connection he felt with her, a connection that seemed to cut through all the business deals, the contracts, and the cold, calculated life he had been living. But he also knew he couldn't just walk away from the deal he had made with Eleanor. He had signed a contract, a binding agreement that had changed the course of his life. And now, with every moment he spent with Emma, he felt torn between two worlds, one of obligation, and the other of something real. Days passed, and Mark continued to meet with Emma. Each time, it felt more difficult to keep up the facade of the life he had been leading. He found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't opened up to anyone else in years. They talked about everything: art, dreams, and the struggles that had shaped their lives. It was easy to talk to her, and for the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he was truly being seen. But the weight of his secret continued to loom over him. One afternoon, Mark found himself sitting in his office at his apartment, staring at the papers Eleanor had had him sign. The ink on the pages felt like it was suffocating him, each clause binding him more tightly to a future he wasn't sure he wanted. He had come so far, but the price of it all was becoming too much to bear. Eleanor had kept her word. She had paid off his debts, arranged for his financial future, and even offered him a role in her business ventures. Everything he could ever want was at his fingertips, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. He picked up the phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. It was time. He knew it was time to face her, to tell her the truth about what he was feeling. He needed to know if there was a way to have both worlds. He couldn't keep pretending, not with Emma. Not anymore. Mark walked into the upscale restaurant where he had agreed to meet Eleanor. She was already seated at a corner table, her back straight, her gaze fixed on her phone. When she looked up and saw him approaching, her expression softened, but only for a second. She motioned for him to sit. "You're late," she said, her voice calm but with a sharp edge. Mark sat down, taking a deep breath. He had prepared for this conversation, but it still felt like the hardest thing he had ever done. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but with an underlying uncertainty. "I can't do this anymore." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not alarmed. "Do what exactly?" she asked, folding her hands in front of her. Mark hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The contract. This marriage. I agreed to it because I thought I had no other choice. But now, I don't know if it's what I want anymore." There was a brief silence between them, the tension building. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, and Mark could see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating, always calculating. "You're saying you want out?" she asked, her tone colder now. Mark nodded, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't know what I want, but I know this isn't it. I've met someone. Emma. She's different. She makes me feel like I'm not just a piece of a business deal. I don't know if anything can come of it, but I can't keep living this lie." Eleanor's expression remained impassive, though there was a flicker of something hurt, maybe, or anger behind her eyes. "And what exactly do you think you're going to find with her?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. Mark's heart clenched, but he stood his ground. "I don't know. But I need to find out. I need to see if I can live a life that isn't about money and power. I want something real." Eleanor took a deep breath, clearly trying to keep her composure. "You really think you can walk away from all of this? From everything I've done for you?" She leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "You think you can just throw away everything I've given you for some fleeting feeling? You think she'll want you when she finds out who you really are?" Mark winced at her words, but he didn't back down. "I have to try," he said quietly. "I have to know if there's something more to life than this." There was a long pause as Eleanor stared at him, her eyes calculating, as if she were trying to read him like one of the contracts she so expertly managed. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze cool and distant. "I see," she said, her voice calm again, almost too calm. "Well, then, Mark, you've made your decision. I won't stop you. But know this: you'll never have the same opportunities again. You'll be nothing more than a failed project. You'll lose everything. And she will never see you the same way once she knows who you really are." Mark swallowed hard but nodded. "Maybe. But I have to try." He stood up, ready to leave, but Eleanor's voice stopped him. "Just remember," she said softly, her words laced with a sharp edge, "there's no going back once you walk away from me." Mark didn't look back as he left the restaurant, the weight of her words heavy on his shoulders. But something inside him had shifted. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, or if it would lead to anything at all. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally making a choice for himself. End of part 4. Mark woke up the next morning with a sense of emptiness hanging over him. It had been hours since he left Eleanor's restaurant, and the weight of their conversation still lingered. The decision he had made the night before, the one that had ripped him away from a life of financial security and led him into the unknown, felt both freeing and terrifying. He had walked away from everything, and now, with no plan or clear path ahead, he wasn't sure what to do next. He walked across his small apartment, the stillness of the room pressing in on him. He had never felt this alone before. The apartment, once filled with the cold excitement of his financial freedom, now felt like a cage. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Emma's number, wondering if he should call her. But the fear of rejection held him back. He didn't know how much he could tell her, or how much she would understand. He didn't know how to explain his life to her, not the life he was leaving behind, not the lies he had told, and certainly not the deal he had made with Eleanor. With a deep breath, Mark walked out of the apartment, determined to face whatever came next. He needed to make things right, or at least try. He needed to find Emma again, to see if there was still a chance for something real. When he arrived at the gallery later that day, his heart raced. He wasn't sure if Emma would even be there, but he had to try. As he walked in, he saw her standing near the back, studying a painting with her usual quiet intensity. She didn't see him at first, so he took a moment to watch her, captivated by the way she lost herself in the art. She was different, so much more than he had ever expected. She was the opposite of everything his world had tried to mold him into. She was real, and he wanted to believe in that. Finally, Emma turned and saw him. A small smile spread across her face, and for a moment, everything else faded. Mark walked toward her, his nervousness slowly melting away as he saw the warmth in her eyes. "Hi," he said softly. "Hey," Emma replied, her smile widening. "I didn't expect to see you again. Everything okay?" Mark hesitated, unsure of what to say. He couldn't just tell her the truth, not yet, anyway. He had to be careful, but he also wanted to be honest with her, to let her see the real him. But first, he needed to know if there was even a chance for something between them. "Yeah, things are complicated," Mark said, his voice trailing off. I wanted to see you again. To talk." Emma raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Talk? About what? Mark took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He couldn't keep running from his past or his feelings any longer. He had to take a chance, or he would lose everything. About us, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's expression softened, and she stepped a little closer. Us, she repeated, her voice gentle. What do you mean? Mark looked into her eyes, searching for the right words. I know this sounds crazy, but I feel something with you. Something real. I don't know if you feel it too, but I had to tell you. I've been living in a world full of lies and expectations, and I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to keep pretending. Emma seemed taken aback for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read him. Mark. I don't understand, she said slowly. What do you mean by pretending? What's going on? Mark's heart pounded in his chest. This was harder than he had imagined. He couldn't just tell her everything right away, but he knew he couldn't keep hiding the truth from her. I've made a deal with someone, he began, his voice tense. Someone who promised me everything. Financial security, a future. But it wasn't real. It was all just a transaction. And now, I feel like I'm stuck in a life that isn't mine. I don't know how to get out of it. Emma stepped back slightly, her brow furrowing as she processed his words. Mark, I don't understand. Who are you talking about? And why didn't you tell me this before? Mark winced. She was right. He had kept so much from her, and now it was all spilling out in a way he hadn't planned. He had wanted to protect her from his messy, complicated life, but it seemed like there was no way to do that anymore. I'm sorry, he said softly. I should have told you. I just didn't want to drag you into this world of lies. But I can't keep hiding from the truth. Emma studied him for a long moment before speaking again. Mark, I need to understand. I need to know what this really is, what we're doing. Because I can't be part of something if I don't know what's really going on. Mark felt a pang of guilt, but he nodded. I understand, he said quietly. I'll tell you everything. But I need you to know, Emma, that whatever happens, I want to be honest with you now. I don't want to pretend anymore. Not with you. Emma's eyes softened as she reached out to touch his arm, her fingers warm against his skin. I don't want you to pretend either, Mark, she said gently. But I need to know if you're really ready to let go of the life you've been living. If you're ready to make the choice to be with me. Mark nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't know where this would go, but he knew one thing for sure: he was ready to make that choice. He just hoped it wasn't too late. End of part 5. Mark walked home that evening with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. Emma's words lingered in his mind, echoing with the weight of the decision he had made. She had asked him to prove that he was ready to leave the life he had been living, to show that he was willing to fight for something real. And for the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he was ready to do just that. But it wasn't going to be easy. The life he had built with Eleanor, the one that had promised him everything he thought he wanted, wasn't something he could walk away from without consequences. Mark had already felt the pressure of that life, the suffocating expectations, the deals that were made in the shadows. But now, as he thought about Emma, about the connection they shared, he realized that all of the wealth, the power, the security had never truly been what mattered. The next morning, Mark sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. He had called Eleanor's office, but he hadn't heard back yet. He knew that calling her was inevitably couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. He had to be honest with her. But that didn't make it any easier. After what felt like hours, his phone rang. It was her. Mark, Eleanor's voice was cool, measured as always. I was wondering when you'd reach out. I assume you're ready to talk? Mark took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I am, he said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. But I don't think I can do this anymore. I've made a mistake, Eleanor. I don't want this life. I don't want the contract, the deal, all of it. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Mark could almost hear Eleanor's thoughts, the calculation behind her silence. When she spoke again, her voice was cold, almost detached. I see, she said, her tone unchanging. You think you can just walk away from everything I've given you? You think you can turn your back on me, on what we've built together? Mark's chest tightened at her words, but he knew this was a conversation he had to have. I can't keep living a lie. I've met someone who makes me feel like I'm more than just a business transaction. I want to be with her, Eleanor. I want something real. Eleanor's silence spoke volumes. When she finally responded, her voice was cold, almost bitter. And what about the life I gave you? What about the future I offered? You think you can have it all, Mark? You think you can just throw everything away for some fleeting feeling? You'll never get that life back. You'll be nothing without me. Mark closed his eyes, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Her words stung, but he had made his choice. I don't care about the life you offered, he said, his voice firm. It's not real. It was never real. I've spent too long chasing something that doesn't mean anything. But I want to try to build something that does. I want to be with Emma. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mark could almost feel the weight of Eleanor's disappointment, the crushing finality in her words. Fine, she said at last, her voice cool and distant. If you think you can walk away from this, then go. But don't expect me to be there when it all falls apart. You'll be back, Mark. You always are. Mark felt a pang of guilt, but he didn't let it show. Goodbye, Eleanor, he said, before hanging up. As soon as the call ended, Mark felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had made the break. But now, as he stood in his apartment, the weight of the decision began to settle in. There was no turning back now. Later that day, Mark went to the art gallery where he had first met Emma. He had called her earlier, and she agreed to meet him. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but as soon as he saw her standing there, her eyes searching his face, he felt the familiar pull of something real. Hey, Emma said softly, her voice full of warmth. I'm glad you came. Mark smiled, his heart racing. I needed to see you. To tell you the truth. Emma nodded, her gaze steady. I'm listening. Mark took a deep breath, the weight of his decision still heavy on his shoulders, but his resolve clear. I've made some mistakes, Emma. I've been living a life that wasn't mine, one that was built on lies and promises that didn't mean anything. But I'm ready to change. I'm ready to be honest, with you, with myself. I don't want to hide anymore. Emma stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. Mark, are you sure? You've walked away from everything. You can't just go back to the way things were. Mark nodded. I don't want to go back. I want to build something real, with you. If you'll have me. Emma's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mark felt like he was standing on solid ground. She reached out and took his hand, a small, but significant gesture. I'm with you, she said, her voice full of hope. Let's build something real, together. Mark smiled, his heart full. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. End of part 6. Mark woke up the next morning, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The weight of the decisions he had made over the past few days still lingered, but now, with Emma by his side, he felt like he was moving towards something real. He had made the choice to walk away from everything, his deal with Eleanor, his life of security and power, and he was starting to believe it was the right one. But even though he was determined to follow his heart, the reality of his situation had yet to sink in completely. The choices he had made would come with consequences, and he wasn't sure how long it would take before the past came knocking on his door. As he sat in his small kitchen, drinking coffee, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Eleanor's assistant, asking if Mark could come to a meeting later that day. He had been avoiding her calls since the night he made the decision to leave their deal behind. But now, the reality of the situation hit him. He couldn't just walk away without facing the consequences. He owed it to Eleanor to at least have the final conversation. He didn't know what she was going to say, but he knew it would be difficult. Later that afternoon, Mark arrived at the sleek office building where Eleanor worked. The polished marble floors and the cold, modern decor had always made him feel out of place, like he didn't belong. But now, the familiar setting felt even more alien. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, his heart pounding as he made his way up. When the doors opened, Eleanor was waiting for him in her usual spot behind a large, glass desk, her expression as cold as ever. She looked at him with a mixture of expectation and disappointment, as though she already knew everything that was about to be said. "Mark," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "I see you've finally made your decision." Mark nodded, unable to meet her eyes at first. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I never meant for it to come to this, but I can't go on living the way I was. I had to make a choice, and I chose something real." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You think you can just throw everything away for some fleeting feeling? You think she'll want you when she knows who you really are? You've been nothing but a project to me, Mark. A way to secure my future." Mark flinched at her words, but he didn't back down. "Maybe I've been a project to you, but I've been a person to me. And I've spent too long hiding from who I really am. I'm sorry for everything you've done for me, but I can't continue this charade." Eleanor stood up, her eyes cold and calculating. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You'll see. People like you don't get to just walk away from everything they've worked for. And you'll never have the same opportunities again. You'll be nothing without me." Mark looked up at her, a sense of resolve flooding his chest. "I don't want your opportunities, Eleanor. I want a life that's mine, a life that's real. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm willing to take that risk." Eleanor's face softened for a brief moment, almost as if she were considering his words. But just as quickly, her expression hardened again. "Fine," she said, her tone colder than ever. "If you want to ruin your life, that's your choice. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." Mark didn't say another word. He turned and walked out of the office, his heart heavy with the weight of their conversation. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he was in control of his own fate. He had made his choice, and now, he had to live with it. As he stepped outside, the fresh air hit his face, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. He pulled out his phone and texted Emma, "I'm done. It's over with her. I'm ready for whatever comes next, with you." He waited for her reply, his heart racing as he stared at the screen. It wasn't long before her message came through. "I'm so proud of you, Mark. Let's build something together. Something real." Mark smiled, feeling the weight lift from his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. No more hiding. No more pretending. He was ready to face whatever the future held with Emma by his side. End of part 7. Mark stood at the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the buildings. He had always admired this view, but today, it felt different. It was as if the weight of the world had finally shifted, and the future, though uncertain, seemed full of possibility. He had made his choice. He had walked away from Eleanor, from a life of business deals and calculated moves. And now, as he stood here, he felt free for the first time in a long time. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a message from Emma. "Dinner tonight? My treat. I think we need to talk about the future." Mark smiled at the message. For all the uncertainty in his life, one thing was clear: he wanted to build that future with her. He quickly texted back, "I'll be there. I can't wait to see you." As he sent the message, he felt a surge of hope. Everything had been leading to this moment, and now he was ready to embrace it. Later that evening, Mark met Emma at a cozy little restaurant on the edge of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was exactly what he needed. The atmosphere was warm, inviting, and calm, so different from the cold, high-stakes world he had left behind. Emma was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. When she saw him, her face lit up, and she waved him over. "Hey," she said softly as he sat down. "I'm glad you came." Mark smiled, his heart pounding in his chest. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." They sat in silence for a moment, taking in the soft hum of the restaurant, the clinking of dishes, and the warmth of each other's company. It was a strange feeling being with someone who saw him for who he truly was, not the version of himself he had tried to build for the world. "I've been thinking," Emma began, her voice gentle, yet filled with determination. "About us, about what comes next. You've made such a big change, Mark. You've walked away from everything, and I want to make sure we're on the same page." Mark took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I'm ready to start over, Emma. I know it won't be easy, but I'm ready to do whatever it takes to build something real, something that's ours." Emma reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. The warmth of her touch gave him a sense of peace, and in that moment, he realized that this was the life he wanted. Not the money, not the power, but the connection, the honesty, the love that Emma had brought into his world. "I'm ready too," she said softly. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. No more pretending, no more hiding. Just us." Mark smiled, his heart full. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, challenges, and maybe even moments of doubt. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He had made the choice to live an authentic life, and he knew that with Emma by his side, he could face whatever came their way. As they talked over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, just like it always had. They spoke about their dreams, their fears, and everything in between. And in that moment, Mark realized that he had found something he had been searching for his entire life: a partner, a true companion who would stand by his side no matter what. The night came to a close, and they walked out into the cool evening air. Mark took Emma's hand, and for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of the past on his shoulders. He was stepping into a new chapter, a new life, one that was entirely his own. And as they walked down the quiet street, Mark knew that this was only the beginning. End of Part 8. Mark stood in front of the small art gallery, looking up at the building with a sense of anticipation. It had been months since he had made the decision to leave his old life behind, to walk away from the business world that had once defined him. And now, standing here, on the edge of something new, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had made it through the storm, and now, everything seemed to be falling into place. Emma was by his side, and together, they were building a future that felt more real than anything he had ever known. Today was the day. Emma's art exhibition, the one she had worked so hard for, was finally happening. The gallery was buzzing with excitement as people filled the space, admiring her work. Mark stood off to the side, watching her with a smile. He had been there for her every step of the way, just as she had been there for him. Their connection had grown stronger with each passing day, and now, as he looked at her, standing confidently among her art, he knew there was no turning back. The night before, Emma had told him how nervous she was. "What if no one likes my work?" she had asked, her voice trembling with doubt. "What if they think I'm not good enough?" Mark had taken her hands in his, looking into her eyes with a tenderness that only grew with time. "You are more than good enough," he had said softly. "This is your dream, Emma. You've worked so hard for it. And I believe in you. I always will." Now, watching her laugh and talk to guests, Mark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She was everything he had ever wanted in a partner: strong, creative, kind, and real. She had shown him a world he had never known, a world of possibility, of dreams, and of love. The kind of love that wasn't based on contracts or obligations, but on trust and mutual respect. As the evening continued, the crowd grew more lively, and Mark found himself talking to some of Emma's friends and collectors. But his mind kept drifting back to her. He admired the way she handled herself, the way she spoke with passion about her art. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, he found himself standing beside her. "Hey," he said softly, his voice just above a whisper. She turned to him, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Hey yourself," she replied, her smile warm and inviting. Mark took a step closer, his heart racing. He had something important to say, something he had been holding inside for too long. "Emma," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened between us. About how far we've come, how much we've been through together. I've never felt more sure of anything in my life. I want you to know that I am all in. For us. For this life we're building together." Emma's eyes softened, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. "I'm all in too, Mark," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I've never been more sure of anything." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. In that moment, surrounded by people, surrounded by the buzz of the gallery, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had made the right choice. No matter what the future held, no matter how difficult things might get, he knew that as long as they were together, they could face anything. As the evening came to a close, Mark and Emma stepped outside into the cool night air, the sounds of the city filling the silence between them. Mark reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. He had made the biggest decision of his life, and now, as they walked together into the future, he knew that everything was exactly as it should be. "I love you," Mark said softly, his voice full of sincerity. Emma smiled, her eyes shining with affection. "I love you too, Mark." And as they walked down the street together, hand in hand, Mark realized that the love they had built wasn't just real, it was everything. The beginning of something beautiful, something lasting. A future they would face together, side by side. End of story.